When you actually look into the Warren Commission, it's very often the case that only one or a few of the members were even present at each interview. So what you end up with then is commission members who are ill-informed, underinformed, unable to participate in the actual investigation, unable to really put their stamp of approval on the investigation, and then don't even believe this single bullet theory. To me, it all falls apart. Hello, and welcome back to my channel. I'm Jessica Nell, and if you're new, then welcome. I would love to earn your subscription today. We are going to read an excerpt from a book by Robert Groden and Harrison Livingstone. This book is called High Treason: The Assassination of President John F. Kennedy, What Really Happened. Now, it actually technically made number 2 on the New York Times bestseller list, but a person who was on the inside of the New York Times told Robert Groden that it actually hit number 1, but they just kept it off of there, that the editors made that decision. So it was on the bestseller list, I believe, for 6 weeks. It came out in March of 1989. And I actually now have a signed copy because I have gotten to meet Robert Groden in the last few weeks of my life, and it has been fantastic. Every minute I spend with him, I feel like we are just going through questions, and he is helping acquaint me. He and his wife, Janet, are acquainting me with the research and pointing me in interesting directions and have just welcomed me in such a sweet way. So one of the things that I did when I first was going to meet him was I started reading High Treason, and I am slowly working through it. It is excellent. It's one of those earlier first looks at the assassination. Now, there are a few others. Penn Jones Jr. kept a chronicling of odd details in his books called Forgive My Grief. There was this man, Harold Weisberg, who Robert Groden knew and who wrote a series of books called Whitewash, examining the report on the Warren Report. There were other people like Sylvia Marr and, others who were looking into it. But this was one of those early books that chronicled the problems with the Warren Report and started to look at the question of what really happened, what really occurred. And so one of the things that I found most insightful was this introductory section. And so I just thought it would be really great to read through it together, to talk through their assessment of what actually happened and read through the tragedy of it together. So let's do that. The introduction starts this way. The CIA's strategy, according to these sources, is to stymie the House assassination probe. Too close scrutiny of the tragedy might embarrass the CIA, which withheld crucial facts from the Warren Commission. It was a mistake, we believe, for the CIA to operate at the KGB level. That's a quote from Jack Anderson and Les Witten. And so now we're going to read the introduction. When President Kennedy died, much of the world believed that a conspiracy was involved. The first reports from Dallas told of a second gunman on a grassy knoll at Dealey Plaza, a large hole in the back of the president's head, and a fusillade of shots. A few days later, the Warren Commission was established under the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, Earl Warren, to inquire into the assassination. Many witnesses had said that someone had fired from the knoll, which was to the right and front of the president's car. The commission denied that a gunman was on the knoll, but years later, a committee in the U.S. House of Representatives was forced to admit the existence of the second gunman and the probable existence of a conspiracy when it was demonstrated that a police sound recording made during the shooting contained a gunshot, which could only have come from the grassy knoll. There are links throughout this introduction. I'm not citing all of them, but Robert Groden served, here's a photo of him at that time, he served on these committees, these congressional investigations, and had been invited to review the photographic data and was privy to the audio discussion that's being referenced there of the dicta belt. This was one more shot than the Warren Commission admitted to. There was one shot in the dicta belt that had a very unique audio signature. that could only have come from the grassy knoll. The Warren Commission was composed of the ideological enemies of the murdered liberal Northern Democrat, 5 Republicans, and 2 conservative Southern Democrats. The commission chose to ignore much of the hard evidence in the case, kept much of it a secret, and in the end published a theory known as the Warren Report. I do have a copy of the Warren Report here, the original, that I just got from an antique store recently, so I'll be working through that privately. The single bullet theory. This theory held that there was only one gunman, that he was in a 6th floor window of the Texas School Book Depository, and that only 3 shots were fired at the president. The commission said that Lee Harvey Oswald was the assassin, and they found no evidence of conspiracy. The media then made it a certainty and convicted Oswald in the press. One of the bullets, according to the commission, struck the president in the back of the neck, came out the front of his throat, and badly wounded former Democratic Governor John Connally. This theory was invented by Warren Commission counsel, now Republican Senator from Pennsylvania, Arlen Specter, and former President Gerald Ford, a member of the commission at the time he was in Congress. This theory had no basis in fact, as it contradicted the evidence. Insofar as the theory relies upon the bullet which was recovered in the hospital, the theory is impossible. As one of the doctors, Lieutenant Colonel Pierre Fink, who conducted the autopsy said, quote, "For the reason that there are more grains of metal still in Governor Connally's wrist than there are missing from that bullet. That bullet could not have done it." I want to point out that just last month, I believe, it was either in April or May of this year, we read through selections from Dr. Charles Crenshaw's book, and he talked about observing the surgery of Governor Connally, and 5 bullet fragments at least were removed from his wrist, and there was a remaining one in the thigh. So the bullet that went through the wrist and went in the thigh could not have looked like CE 399, the bullet that is called the magic bullet. It's the single bullet theory, and it shows no missing fragments. So what they're pointing to dovetails precisely with what Dr. Crenshaw observed, that there were not just missing fragments that remained, but there were missing fragments that were removed that cannot then be the same bullet as the fully intact magic bullet 399. A second bullet, allegedly fired from behind, was claimed to have struck President Kennedy in the back of the head near the hairline, about 2.5 centimeters from the occipital protuberance, exploding the head and blowing out a large part of the skull, killing him. The report simply suppressed the exact location of the large blowout, which was in fact in the back of the head, just above an entry wound. Was the president struck twice in the head, first from behind near the hairline and then from in front, or was he also struck in his throat from the front, and then 6 inches down from the neck in his back from behind, rather than in the rear of the neck? Was John Connally hit with still another bullet, as the FBI and Connally originally claimed, rather than the single bullet Specter and Ford claimed hit both men? According to the Warren Commission, a third shot missed, and a bystander, James Tague, was struck with debris from the cement curb it hit. He was standing down near the triple underpass. And so that was the bullet that, prior to that information about James Tague, the Warren Commission had planned to say that there was one bullet that struck Kennedy at the back of the neck, one that struck him in the head, and then one that struck Governor Connally, so that those bullets could be 3 separate shots. But then the trouble came in because there's a James Tague. He's standing down by the triple underpass. He was observably and reportedly and credibly hit by a piece of debris. So now they have something different they have to deal with. That takes one shot off of the table. So then the magic bullet theory, the single bullet theory, comes about. The assumption that a single bullet allegedly struck both Kennedy and Connally became known as the magic or single bullet theory. 3 of the 7 members of the commission did not actually believe this theory. It now appears that most of the commission's conclusions were in error. Okay, I just want to stop right there before we continue reading and ask you, did you even know that 3 out of 7, that's nearly half of the commission, did not believe the theory of the single bullet? That is the theory on which lone gunman no conspiracy rests. If there are more than 3 bullets, you have a conspiracy. Because only 3 were found there by that window. It's completely impossible. I mean, frankly, it's nearly impossible to even physically get off the number of shots that were required for 3. But you definitely can't get off any more than that. And so then you've got a conspiracy. So they needed it to be 3 bullets, but nearly half of the commission members did not believe it. Did you know that? Let me know in the comments. I did not know that. I thought that the Warren Commission was just a solid pillar of judgment, that they had all listened to every testimony, that they had devoted themselves to this analysis. That's what it seems like it calls for to me, that really more than 7 men, but that at least 7 honorable men would sit and carefully pore over every testimony, carefully think through the realities, and come together and not present a story to the American people of which they were not even all in agreement. To me, that is crazy. And that none of us knew that is crazy. When you actually look into the Warren Commission, it's very often the case that only one or a few of the members were even present at each interview and discussion by witnesses. So what you end up with then is commission members who are ill-informed, underinformed, unable to participate in the actual investigation, unable to really put their stamp of approval on the investigation, and then don't even believe this single bullet theory. To me, it all falls apart. Let's keep reading. The headline is A Strange Autopsy. The autopsy at the Naval Military Hospital in Bethesda was not really an autopsy at all. Many standard autopsy procedures were not followed. The doctors did not explore the wounds in the throat to see if a bullet had passed through the body because they didn't know that there was a wound in the throat, as a tracheotomy had been performed in Dallas by enlarging the hole. There was a tiny hole that had initially been an entry wound that all the doctors at Parkland recognized as an entry wound. That was enlarged in order to make a tracheotomy so that they could enlarge it and help the president to breathe. All of the evidence was that the wound was not in the back of the neck, but 6 inches down in the back, and that the bullet did not traverse the chest at all. In fact, it appears the president was struck by 2 separate shots from behind. These shots from the rear struck him in the back and the head, while 2 more frontal shots struck him in the throat and the head. Additional shots struck Connolly and Tague. If you're not counting, that would be at least 6. You've got 4 for Kennedy, 2 front, 2 back. You've got 1 at least for Connolly and 1 for Tague. That's at least 6 shots. Contrary to the Warren report, there was no evidence that the president was shot in the back of the neck. In addition, the president's brain was never sectioned, which is a standard autopsy procedure to determine the number and trajectory of the missiles. And the brain later disappeared. Yes, I learned a little bit about this. Those of you who have researched, feel free to fill in the gaps of what I'm about to say in the comments. I love when people make research available to others there in the comments section. But my understanding of a brain and autopsy is that it is put in a special solution that makes it firm up a little bit, to take it from the consistency of a soft-boiled egg, which is the description that I heard, to a hard-boiled egg. And that solution takes roughly 2 weeks to do its work, at which point the brain can be vivisected. It can be cut and sliced into portions so that then you can literally trace the trajectory of a bullet through the brain. And so that's the standard operating procedure for an autopsy that was not done here. Then the brain disappears. For 2 years, beginning in the fall of 1976, Congress investigated the assassinations of President Kennedy and Martin Luther King. The House Select Committee on Assassinations delivered a devastating critique of the autopsy, the photographs, and x-rays, and began the painful process of rewriting history. Deciding that America was ready for a little more of the truth, but not the whole truth, Congress admitted, albeit reluctantly, that it was likely there were conspiracies in the murders of both President Kennedy and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. I want to ask you, did you know that? Did you know that our own government decided it was likely there were conspiracies in both men's murders? I think this truth has been pretty successfully sequestered. People that I have talked with that are fairly educated people that still hold to the single bullet theory and hold that Lee Harvey Oswald was the lone gunman don't seem to know that our own government actually found error with the Warren report and indicated actually there was a conspiracy. We don't have all the information to prove how and who, but there's evidence of conspiracy. Traveling wounds is the next headline. The Parkland Hospital doctors and nurses in Dallas were not allowed to see the x-rays and photographs alleged to be of the body. They were amazed more than a decade later when co-author Harrison Livingstone, the Baltimore Sun, Ben Bradley Jr., and his Boston Globe team, both newspapers motivated by and acting under Livingstone's direction, separately showed the pictures to these medical witnesses. In addition, when the Bethesda Naval Hospital autopsies were shown, the photographs and x-rays by the House Select Committee on Assassinations, they strongly denounced them as not accurately depicting the wounds. So the very autopsists who saw President Kennedy's body, when they were brought to testify before the House Select Committee on Assassinations and shown the photographs and x-rays, they denounced those photos and x-rays and said they were not accurate. The information that had been entered into the record was not accurate as to what they observed in 1963. The autopsists found that one of the head wounds had moved 4 inches toward the top of the head. 4 inches. You think about that. That is the difference between the single bullet and not. The actual shot appeared to come at the hairline and blow out the back of the head. Everyone who observed the head points in this fashion to the exit wound. What they drew was an entry wound with an exit wound way up here. So when you look at the proposed autopsy photos, they have like this clean-shaven head at the back of the head. It's absurd. You can see it from the Zapruder film. The shot that goes like this and blows, it looks like there's a flap that suddenly opens here. We don't need the autopsies to let us know, but we have them later as printed in this book and future books by Robert Groden. These men who saw the wounds said that the head wounds had moved 4 inches. They denied strongly that there originally had been such a wound on the top of the head. This wound and the large hole in the back of the head, described by many witnesses, which is missing from the official pictures, are the subject of chapter 2. So they're pointing us toward portions in their book that will deal with these various questions being raised in the introduction. The fact that the autopsists questioned these pictures at all indicates something is seriously amiss with the official autopsy photographs. Absolutely. What you would expect if the government was being honest was that even if the autopsy photos were being kept under wraps for purposes of dignity and honor for the president, which you could see could be a reason, what you would expect would be that the autopsists would say, "It's such a shame, but they are every bit as grisly as the reality was, and those pictures accurately represent what we saw." But that is not at all what they say. They denounced the photos. The head wound had moved. They denied there had been such a wound at the top of the head. So everything about the photos is wrong. It's not what at all the people who were there in 1963 observed. The early controversy over the evidence first culminated in the investigations of the former DA of New Orleans, Jim Garrison, who put one of the autopsy doctors, Dr. Fink, on the stand. This doctor testified that high-ranking officers prevented them from performing the autopsy properly, and that the wound in the back did not pass through the body. The Attorney General of the U.S. at the time, Ramsey Clark, who was from Texas, as was President Lyndon Johnson, Kennedy's successor, sought to stymie Garrison's inquiry and constituted a panel of 4 doctors who were allowed to see the alleged autopsy photos and x-rays. Upon observing these photos and x-rays, the Clark panel of doctors found that the wounds had mysteriously traveled. The head entry wound moved 4 inches toward the top of the head from the base of the hairline where the autopsists had seen it, and the neck wound began to gravitate down the back. Headline: Too many mistakes. Originally, police officers with expert knowledge of rifles testified that they had found a German Mauser by the sniper's nest. It was reported on news channels. You can go look it up. They call it a German Mauser. The gun soon changed into an Italian Mannlicher Carcano, despite the fact that it would have been impossible to confuse the two. Gerald Ford, a longtime supporter of the CIA and a member of the Warren Commission, was later appointed by Nixon as vice president to replace Spiro Agnew, who resigned in disgrace. Nixon was himself then forced to resign in the face of almost certain impeachment. President Ford then pardoned Nixon in advance, an unheard of legal procedure, of possible criminal prosecution in the Watergate affair. Ford was not reelected. He had gone to some pains to publish classified top secret material from the Warren Commission without permission in his book on Oswald, in order to suppress information that Oswald was a government agent, and to scotch implications that Oswald had worked for the Office of Naval Intelligence. Oswald had many connections to government operatives. If you're not familiar with that, if this is your first kind of entry into the assassination of President Kennedy, you should know Oswald has a lot of fingerprints that look very much like intelligence. He was trained at a base that looked like intelligence. His defection to Russia fits hand in glove with a known program that was running at the time to have false defectors in order to gain information from the Soviet Union. So there's a lot about Lee Harvey Oswald. He was re-entered into American society without so much as a slap on the wrist. He's just welcomed back in, given a State Department loan. The FBI and CIA both had files on him, but he's not like brought before a military tribunal. He's not tried in the press even as like a defector living among us. Can we trust these men who have betrayed our nation? None of that. He is just entered back in and going around and traveling, going here and there, deciding to go and work with known FBI and CIA contacts. I mean, the more you look into Lee Harvey Oswald, it is a wild tale that looks very much like intelligence. Whether or not he was an agent, an asset, contact, I don't know the differences between those things, but the fact is his behavior is not normal. His movements are not normal. So if you're new to that, there are books you can look at, and we may look at some together, but there is a lot there that's very fascinating. In his book on the case, Ford said that policemen were mistaken about the type of rifle that was found. Mistake is the operative word in all cover-ups. It was said that the autopsists were mistaken. The Warren Commission said that the Dallas doctors and nurses and Jacqueline Kennedy were mistaken, and that the witnesses to a gunman on the grassy knoll made a mistake. Alan Dulles, also a member of the Warren Commission, whom President Kennedy had fired as head of the CIA, made it clear that if Oswald was a government agent, it would never be known. It's quite a case for him to make. We know that you guys would not let us know that. Which makes it all the more suspicious, Alan Dulles. Quote, "Not in our time will all of the facts be revealed," said Chief Justice Warren. Now, ask yourself, why would that be? If there's a known gunman, he's already dead. His family's already been through the ringer. The country's been through the ringer. This terrible thing happened and we all know it. Why would any facts need to be hidden? Tell it all. I can see. Withhold the terrible autopsy photos, perhaps. We don't want to dishonor the president. But tell the facts. Why does anything need to be under lock and key? Why does anything need to be put off 65, 75 years? Why would the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court be saying, not in our lifetime will all the facts be revealed? To me, that's one of the most damning quotes in all of this. The Chief Justice of the United States telling us we won't have all the facts. And here we are in 2025 and we still don't have them. Since then, evidence has piled up that intelligence operatives were involved in the crime, that Oswald himself was an agent, but was set up as the patsy and did not shoot anyone. Many witnesses and others connected with the case, the biggest mystery of the century, have died under strange circumstances. Those have been chronicled by a man named Penn Jones Jr. He lived in the Dallas area and went and investigated this thing on his own dime. Very inspiring man. Definitely worth checking out his research. A handful of researchers and critics who continue to pursue the case were placed under surveillance, ordered by Chief Justice Warren. They experienced destabilization and harassment. The critics were often reviled as scavengers or communists. The CIA and FBI sent out directives on how to counteract criticism of the report. Why? If it's all true, if we're just laying it out for the American people, we've done our investigation, it is rock solid, we all stand behind it, and it is just the facts, ma'am, then why would the CIA and FBI have to send out directives on how to counteract criticism? Let criticism come. Any good academician or, anybody of any merit knows that the best way to strengthen your arguments is to have other people come at you. Bring the facts. Show what's true. Investigate this thing. It's only going to get stronger because it's true. But that's not what they do. The CIA and the FBI send out directives on how to counteract criticism of the Warren report. Oswald was considered a pro-Castro communist, and anyone who said Oswald didn't murder President Kennedy was stigmatized as a leftist. Today, critics of the Warren report are called buffs to make them appear like hobbyists who play with model trains or collect coins. Yes. Back then, apparently in '89, they were being called buffs. Now we're called conspiracy theorists. Well, I watched a documentary recently that had an interview with Robert Groden, and someone asked him, "Are you a conspiracy theorist?" It was a little kid on Dealey Plaza, there on the grassy knoll where Robert would sit and patiently teach people the facts of the assassination. And his answer was, "Yes, absolutely, I'm a conspiracy theorist." So taking inspiration from that, I also am a conspiracy theorist, and happily so. But it's not a buff. It's not like you're collecting coins or dabbling in a little hobby. These are people who are fighting for truth against the very highest powers of government. It's so obvious, 36 years later, of what was happening at this point. The facts about Oswald. Oswald, it would appear, was not remotely what he was made out to be after the assassination and his own murder. He had become fluent in Russian while a U.S. Marine, and it is not credible that he would be stationed at the CIA base at Atsugi, Japan, the base from which U-2 flights were flown over the Soviet Union, as an admitted Marxist, speaking fluent Russian without being a trusted agent. Think through that. If you have this low-level Marine, he's good with a shot but not trustworthy, and he says he's a Marxist, he's openly saying it, they're not going to trust him at the height of the Cold War with our secrets, with the U-2 spy plane situation, unless he's a trusted agent and then going to be sent out for a known defector program. Many facts make it clear that his much publicized defection to the Soviet Union was staged. He was probably sent to the Soviet Union by the Office of Naval Intelligence or the CIA and then repatriated. In 1987, evidence began to surface that an extra-legal organization of government agents and officers can operate independently in foreign affairs, as in President Reagan's Iran-Contra affair, even functioning from the White House itself, perhaps without the entire knowledge or consent of the president. Such a group or secret team put Oswald together and controlled him from the beginning. It should finally be clear when all the evidence is heard that Oswald probably never went to Mexico City and visited the Cuban and Soviet embassies there shortly before the assassination, as alleged in the Warren Report. Right. I mean, you should look into that. If nothing else, if you are still on the fence about who Oswald was or what he was doing, the very first conversation that Hoover and our new president, LBJ, had right after the assassination talks about Lee Harvey Oswald, talks about him going to Mexico City, and that the voice on the audio recording isn't that of Oswald, that the face is not that of Lee Harvey Oswald. And it's not. It's a totally different man. I think there's photos of it here in this book, but it's clearly not Oswald that was there in Mexico City. So then who was it, and why is anyone impersonating such an absurd little man? Some random defector. Why were LBJ and Hoover talking about that from the beginning? Why was there anybody impersonating Lee Harvey Oswald? Unless there's more afoot, unless there is a conspiracy. This evidence was deliberately fabricated by the people who set Oswald up as the patsy in the assassination of President Kennedy. The House of Representatives continues to hold secret a major report on this. Why? The 1976 House Assassinations Committee, walking the most terrible and highest of all tightropes, found after 2 years that, quote, there probably was a conspiracy, end quote, in the murders of both President Kennedy and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. They appeared determined at first not to find any conspiracy, but were trapped by 2 of their members into admitting evidence of conspiracies at the very end, on almost the last day of the investigation. They then had to rewrite their conclusions, which took another 6.5 months. Fabricated evidence. The Assassinations Committee admitted 16 years after the crime that there was an assassin on the grassy knoll firing, as some 50 witnesses had said all along. A police recording made during the assassination has the sounds of all the shots on it. There were at least 6 shots, probably 7, on the tape. But the House committee confirmed only 4. There is considerable photographic evidence of the sniper on the knoll as well. But the dictabelt recording of the shots made by the Dallas police was never essential to prove the conspiracy. The tape only corroborated what we already knew, as Congressman Louis Stokes, the last chairman of the Assassinations Committee, said on national television. The recent congressional committee decided to tell us of 4 shots, which is 1 more than the 1964 Warren Commission admitted, but they claim after long confusion and debate that the grassy knoll sniper's bullet missed. They have to cover up the rest because otherwise it would reveal that the autopsy evidence is fabricated. And the committee had, in fact, evidence of that fabrication from the beginning. This book will provide evidence of that forgery and evidence of a 3rd sniper and probably a 4th, 2 in front and 2 behind. Congressman Christopher Dodd, now a senator, believed it was clear that there were 2 snipers firing from behind the president in addition to the grassy knoll sniper. In fact, the whole world believed there was a conspiracy in the assassination. President Johnson believed it right up to the time of his death, and he believed that the CIA was involved in the murder. So, did you know that? Did you know that President Johnson did not believe the Warren Commission? The 1980 book by Anthony Summers, Conspiracy, right there, that little orange title, I just got it in the mail last week, goes a long way towards saying what really happened on that terrible day in November 1963, but even Summers' work leaves many questions unanswered. High Treason picks up where Summers' work left off. The committee, as with all of the other investigative bodies before it, could not conduct a clean, honest investigation, and it was doomed from the start. Considering the forces ranged against the inquiry, it's extraordinary that anything at all was achieved. The key to understanding who killed President Kennedy lies with the autopsy photographs. Those photographs may tell us more about the assassination than all of the official investigations. Perhaps the single most important question in the investigation was never asked. Why were the autopsy photographs and x-rays never officially shown to the numerous doctors and nurses in Dallas who treated President Kennedy. Had this question been pursued, the true nature of the conspiracy would then have been exposed, because the crucial pictures allegedly of the back of the president's head are forged. That forgery is one of the keys to the conspiracy. Who would have had that kind of access to the evidence in order to alter it? Who had the capability to alter it? The vital autopsy photos of the back of the president's head were altered immediately after the autopsy in order to cover up the fact that the president received 2 bullets in the head, one from the rear and one from the front. And this second shot blew out the back of his head, as Jackie Kennedy testified to the Warren Commission. Nobody, including the Warren Commission, saw these pictures for years. The Groden enhancement of the Zapruder film. You guys, we are going to talk about this with the man himself, so I will leave that discussion for one of our future videos. The Groden enhancement of the Zapruder film, taken during the assassination, clearly shows the president rocketed backwards by this frontal shot and the back of his head blowing out. Subsequent frames of the film show that the shape of the president's head has changed and is elongated after the explosion, with the back of the head stretched out. A large ring apparent where the hole in the back of the head is, beneath a shock of hair. Part of the president's skull and brains were blown backwards and to the left onto a motorcycle policeman and onto the grass beside the road. That's the final evidence that we will talk about here. Did you know, number one, that, of course, Jackie climbed onto the back of the car to retrieve a portion of the president's brain, which she then held until she was in the corridor outside Trauma Room 1, and then offered to a doctor to say, if this could help. And she offers part of her husband's brain. Did you know that a piece of skull about the size of a deck of playing cards was found in Dealey Plaza, was identified as a piece of the skull that is right back here in the occipital region of the skull? They didn't have DNA testing back then, so there wasn't a chance to match it. And photographs were taken of that piece. And then it was shipped to DC. And guess what happened? It was never seen again, of course. But did you know that that piece of skull, human skull, from the occipital region of the skull was found in Dealey Plaza the next day? Did you know that the motorcycle man beside and behind in the motorcade had his helmet reportedly covered in blood and brains so that he had to wipe it off behind the president to the left? Those are all pieces of data that are clearly there that do not fit with a rear shot from the 6th floor depository. They only fit from here, an entry shot with an exit wound that blows the brains that Jackie grabs, the skull piece that is found, the blood and brains all over the policeman's helmet. That evidence is there for us. If you are one that has held that the Warren Commission is completely solid, you have to grapple with the fact that our own government found that their investigation was not accurate. Autopsists did not confirm the photos, and our very own government said there was likely a conspiracy. So that's where that is left in the introduction of this wonderful book. I hope that each one of you that are listening that are interested in this will grab the whole book. It is a thick book. The portion we read was just 3 or 4 pages here in the front, but what a fantastic read, and full of evidence, with photography, with explanations, and tons of citations here in the back for your perusal. So check that out. Let me know in the comments what you think. Bring your evidence and let's have a great discussion. We'll see you there. Have a great day.